Hey gang, as you know, I have not been well lately. So if I start coughing through the video, you'll have to bear with me. I'm gonna do two short video podcasts that screenshot what we are looking at in slavery, so that way I can answer some of these questions for you, and so that way it also might give you an idea of, oh, I wasn't sure if this answer was correct, but now I see it is, or oh, I got that correct, but now I can see there's more. So what I asked y'all to do was to answer, I believe, up to questions number 5, where you had to watch the video about the middle passage. Not very easy. We're going to discuss this in class. So what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to bring us to question number 10. So we're going to look all the way up to question number 10 today in this video, okay? So when we looked at what slavery is, we wrote this on the board. We said that slavery means forced labor or forced servitude onto someone who's not getting any pay or without pay. Forced labor without pay. So we've discussed this and we talked about what slavery meant historically last year in our Age of Exploration unit. We then looked at this very briefly last year, you might have remembered, but we did put it on the board when we were reading. Excuse me. I've told you I'm going to cough. You just have to accept it. That it was Portugal that introduced race-based slavery in the 1400s. And if we think about why it was Portugal, well, if we look geographically on the map here, Portugal is right here where I have the mouse, which means it's a coastal city. It's a coastal country. It's the farthest westward of all of these European nations, also very close to Africa. Portugal, because it's a nation that is on a peninsula, had to have a good navy in order to defend itself against intruders. So Portugal had one of the best navies in the world in the 1400s, all the way up to the 1600s, really. And what they ended up doing is they ended up building ships, going to Africa, capturing Africans from this area. We call this the Gold Coast off of Africa because of gold sources and because of slave labor. And so Portuguese would come from Portugal. They would sail along the trade winds. They would go to Africa's coast. They would capture Africans, and then they would follow the trade winds and the sea routes to South America, the Indies, the West Indies, we know them as the Caribbean islands, and then back to Europe, kind of going through this triangular trade passage, okay? So really, again, it's Portugal that's the one that's able to do this. So even 50 years before Columbus sailed the ocean blue, the Portuguese were the first to take African blacks back to Lisbon. Lisbon's the capital of Portugal today. One of the things is that Europe wanted certain crops. They wanted coffee, I do every day. Tobacco, rum, sugar, I do every day. And in order for these very high labor, for these high demand, for these expensive and difficult crops to grow, slave labor was what made it possible, because you had these mass amounts of people working, and they were the ones who were enduring and doing the struggle work in order for the crops to be grown. And if slaves died, it wasn't an issue to the Europeans, as they would simply replace them with more slaves. So between 1441 and 1888, between 10 and 14 million Africans were brought to the Western Hemisphere. It's not a lot. Some of you got that wrong. You put 12 million. I don't know where you got that exact number one from, but we don't know that exact number because here we go. It actually answers question number 8. I'm not really going into tremendous order, so I apologize. When I asked you to say approximately how many Africans were torn from their homeland and sold into slavery, it's about 10 to 14 million. Archaeologically speaking, that is the estimate. Why don't you think we know that exact number? Well, I'm sure some of you would say, oh, well, because they didn't exactly keep track of all the slaves on the ship, or maybe some of the counts were incorrect, or maybe some slaves were smuggled, maybe some slaves were killed or died on the voyage and were not recorded, maybe some ships illegally brought slaves over, maybe some ships perished and we don't know the result. Maybe there are a lot of maybes. And as I scroll back down here with the triangular slave trade, I asked y'all to watch this video about the Atlantic slave trade route. If you haven't watched it already, that's on you. You got to watch this. That's on you. You need to watch this. That talks about the actual triangular slave route, and it talks a lot about the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage being the route that goes from Africa to the Western Hemisphere. So the route, the Middle Passage, obviously it's the middle leg of the triangular trade, and it's the route that goes from Africa to North and South America, the Indies, or the islands, the Caribbean islands. Now, I know I kind of jumped all over the place there for a minute. We looked at number 2, why were what nation introduced it, excuse me. Now, why were Africans chosen? Y'all did a very good job of this in class for the 15 minutes I was there last week. Is that, first of all, skin color was the main difference. They looked different. Remember, when we think about the concept of different means other. And sometimes when we think about different and other, we think about that in a negative connotation or a negative context. And so that's how Europeans looked at black Africans. They looked different skin color. They spoke different languages. They had different technology. They had technology. It's not like they were primitive, but they didn't have they didn't have firearms and weapons of that caliber. So that's where I think people get the argument of, oh, well, they were inferior technology. They had been ruling Africa for thousands of years. Religion, Islam. Islam spread to Africa, excuse me, in the 7th century CE, so in the 600s to 700s. And again, you have a white Christian Europe that has shipping, that also has weaponry, that is easy for them to overtake Africans. And also, if you think about it too, remember when I did the 1491 thing? In 1491, there was only one types of peoples in North America and South America, indigenous, natives. And then 1492, there are 2 cultures, Europeans and then the indigenous, the natives. And then now at 1619, when the Africans are brought to Jamestown, that's question number 9, that they were brought to Jamestown, Virginia. The Africans were brought there in 1619. There was 20 of them brought there. Is that when they were brought to Jamestown, that now we have 3 types of people, 3 different civilizations, people living in North and South America, right? Europeans, indigenous, and now black Africans. So, again, thousands of years, 1 types of peoples, and now we have 3 types of people in such a short time period. Okay? And so that's, and Africans too, to go to here, okay, Africans were chosen, again, because of their skin color. They were different, religion, culture, etc. But also, other African kingdoms captured other Africans and brought those to the Europeans, trading for guns, trading for cloth, trading for food. So that way, those Africans would be on top and be superior to other African tribes, other warring tribes. And because of that, those Africans would want more weapons, so that way they could capture other Africans, so that way they could be on top. And so it really was kind of excuse me, it was kind of like a vicious cycle, is that as one African kingdom continued to receive weapons, they would capture other Africans and then sell them into slavery. And it was the concept of as long as we have the weapons, we can do this. And as long as we have the weapons, the enslaved will not be us. But at the same time, now you have those Africans who are reliant on the Europeans for weapons, reliant on Europeans for these goods and services. So it's tough. Mercantilism, we looked at that very briefly. I saw a lot of basic textbook standard definitions. The idea that a parent mother country would create output. The idea that a nation would create, like you have a parent nation that creates forts and trade posts that are not connected to the country itself. So, for example, Portugal creating trade forts and trade posts in parts of Africa or in South America, or setting up forts in the Caribbean islands. That's mercantilism. Because then what you're trying to do is you're trying to create these forts, these outposts, where then you can go and get raw materials and get goods so you can make money. You are the merchant in that sense. So that way you make a profit. We go down to the name of the route. This, I'm telling you right now, this is a very detailed question, and I expect a lot of details when you explain it. The name of the route from Africa to the West Indies, North America, was called the Middle Passage. In terms of the details, there are a tremendous amount of horrific details. I had asked y'all to watch this video where it talks a little bit about the triangular slave trade, but it is this video that talks about life aboard a slave ship. And this video is something that we're going to talk about in class, but also the details in this video are the Middle Passage. This is the answer to which I'm looking for. Let me get out of this real quick to go back. So the Middle Passage, this is when Europeans captured Africans and then brought them across the ocean. It took, some of you put one month to 9 months. I don't know where you got those answers from. I think the power of Google is starting to take over instead of the power of reading. But this is an image drawing of what a slave ship was supposed to look like under deck. Like below deck, this is the outline. Each one of these drawings is a body to give an idea as to the outline of what excuse me, not the outline, the I'm going blank. I think it's the 19 medications I'm taking to maintain this cough. Just bear with me. But it's the construction of the ship. As we see in the video and as we'll discuss, once captured, Africans will be brought to the coast. They'll be held in wooden pens, and then they'll be shackled together. Some of them will be branded. Those who are branded, that way it could tell who owns who. And we'll read together a little bit of these details, but just to read this to you right now. Once the slaves were counted, chained below, and fully controlled, the terrible voyage across the Atlantic began. The time it took to make the Middle Passage depended upon several factors. The point of origin in Africa. If you were in a northern African nation, it probably took you less time. If you were in a southern African region, it probably took you a longer amount of time to make it to the Western Hemisphere. Also, the destination of the Americas. If you were going to Brazil, didn't take as long as we're going to maybe present-day Haiti or present-day Virginia. Also, the size of the ship, depending on whether the ship had a lot of sails, depending on whether it had a skilled crew of men, depending on the actual durability of the ship itself. This could help or prevent travel, and also map readings and knowledge of the seas. Sometimes conditions and winds and currents, it would take forever. But to give you the basic answer, it takes 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days for a ship to go from Africa to the Western Hemisphere to reach its final destination. Now, if I go back down here, we're going to go into a lot of details about this, but I want you to know that the space below decks were so cramped that people were forced to crouch or lie down. They barely had 4 square feet of room. If you look at the tiles on the floor in the school, in each classroom, 1 tile is 1 square foot. So basically 4 of those square tiles to 6 of those tiles is how much room one person had on the ship. And they were chained together below decks. We see these images that have been drawn of what the Middle Passage looks like below decks, but we really only have so much knowledge about it. If you may have remembered when we were in D.C. and we went to the Museum of African American History, there was this exhibit down here below on the base level, and this base level, these were the names of ships and the nation they were from, and when they left, how many were brought on board and how many survived. So when we watch this infographic together, you won't know what to do with yourselves. You take a look at this list, you take a look at this wall, you take a look at these images. I'm sorry, they're in the other direction. You take a look at this image, every single one of these lines is a ship. And this wall extends for 30 meters. It's massive. To go back to the questions, just to make sure we're on the same page, okay? In terms of, so we know that 40 to 60, excuse me, 40 to, oh my gosh, I'm so all out of it. 40 to 60 days for a Portuguese ship, but 60 to 90 days for all other ships. Just up to 90 days, really, is how bad it was. The difference between a loose packer and a tight packer, think of this concept. You have a boat that's built for 400 people. You're going to put 500 people on it, though. 50 will die, and so you'll have 450 that survive. And so, therefore, you have 50 more that survived that would have made it if you just filled it to 400. So that's a tight packer. Putting more people on the ship than the ship is designed to, hoping that those that die and those that get sick and those that do not survive, that number, because you brought on so many, that offsets those that die. A loose packer would be someone that says, we have 300, we have the ability to have 300 people on this ship. We're going to bring 300, or we're going to bring 290 to try to make sure that we've reached the limit, but we're not going to try to go over, assuming that the less we bring, the less likely there will be disease spread, the less likely there will be mutiny, the less likely there will be death, and more will survive. And the method is much more of discussion of whether we think which one would be more effective or profitable. I'm actually going to stop us here on these questions. It's already a 15-minute video, so I'm going to stop us here. And the next video I'll make that answers 10 through 17. So if you're paying attention to what I'm pointing out in the video, you should be all set for that part of the section. And again, the two videos that I asked you to watch, well, the one I asked you to watch, Triangular Slave Trade, and then we're going to watch the Middle Passage video together. Those details are very important in this unit. I look forward to seeing y'all, and have a great day. Be good.